Hello, Roger.
Hello, Tim. How are you doing? Good to see you again.
Yes. Um, you are an author and a marketer and an avid reader of both fiction and non-fiction. I think that's right to say. So,
Yeah,
what's your
I read loads of business books as you would
yeah?
expect, but I do like my fiction. And when I go on holiday, I will either load up the Kindle with lots of fiction, or in the olden days, I actually used to go to the airport and buy a handful of the airport editions. So at least, a quarter of our luggage was always books when we were going on holiday. I can polish off a book a day when I'm lying on a beach.
Okay. Shall we start with your first book, which is a bit on the old side, but we'll start with it. So, The Menace of Mask by Basil Deakin. So, it's quite an old book, isn't it?
Wow, this is a very old book, and it was a bit of a story actually, because this book has always sort of resided in the very, very back of my mind. It's something that my grandfather bought for me, probably at a jumble sale or at a church bazaar or something like that. And I always remember it was actually quite a dinky little book. It wasn't the usual A5 size of a paperback. It was about half the size and half the width, and quite slim. And I remember reading it, and I was probably about 12 years old at the time, and it was like a teenage version of James Bond. So it was that sort of thing. It had gadgets, it had exotic locations. I don't think there were exotic women in it, because it was written for youngish teenagers, and there was this super villain in it whose name was Mask, and if I remember rightly, he did have a mask. And this story has always been in the back of my head, and of course, moved house millions of times. I read the book about 50 times, and eventually it just fell apart and disappeared into the ether. And when you asked me to come on the show, it was there still nagging away at me. So as you do, I typed it into Amazon, and there it is, Menace of Mask by Basil Deakin. Now it looks like in its original copy, I can't remember exactly how much it was, but it said it has a bit of damage to it. But I'm sorely tempted to buy it now, just to effectively resurrect those memories from such a long time ago. And just to complete the story, when I was a teenager and I was at school, I was really into storytelling. I was really into writing stories of my own, and I used to buy these little memo books from the newsagent, and I used to take the cover off and then make little books out of them. And I actually did write a book, and I called it The Menace of Mask. I nicked the title, but I
Oh,
changed the spelling of mask to Masque, the
yeah.
French spelling. And of course, it was just a book that I wrote at home, and I shared it with my friends at school, so it never ever saw light of day enough to get me sued or anything like that as a teenager. But I always remember that Menace of Mask was just there, living in the back of my memory.
Okay. So it's a kind of formative book then. I mean, some of the other books you've got here are also probably later versions of that, I would guess. So
Yeah, I suppose that probably set the scene.
yeah,
And the sort of fiction that I tend to read is adventure type stuff.
yeah.
So there's James Bond. One of the James Bond books is on my list. I then sort of branched off into horror, started reading books by Stephen King. Dean R. Koontz was another one. Sean Hudson, I remember, was one author that I read quite a lot of, and James Herbert was the British horror writer. I used to read a lot of James Herbert books as well, and then science fiction as well. I tended to read Robert Heinlein and who wrote this Stainless Steel Rat? Ray Harryhausen, was it?
I
Or
don't
something
know.
like that. Anyway.
Sure. Yeah. Right. Let's go on to the next book. Pet Cemetery. I'm never quite sure. Is this Pet Sematary by Stephen King, or was Cemetery? Is it just a different spelling?
It is actually spelt. It is actually pronounced as you would pronounce cemetery, where they bury
Yeah.
people. It's just that within the context of the story, the pet cemetery itself is a little graveyard of pets that
Oh,
the local kids have put together, and they've spelt cemetery wrong on the little board that they set up. So this book, Tim, is one of, if not the best horror books I have ever. Have you read it yourself?
no, I haven't,
No.
clearly. Yeah.
One of the best horror books I've ever read.
Yeah.
It's also a book which handles grief and loss quite graphically. But Stephen King is often criticized for writing, in his own words, elephantitis style books. He just writes and writes and writes, and some of his books are thousands of pages long.
Yeah.
Pet Sematary isn't actually as long as some of Stephen King's books. It's quite compact, and the story absolutely races along. But it's a great example of a book that you can genuinely only read once and be absolutely and utterly scared out of your mind. Am I allowed to swear on here?
Well, we are now. We're not on Amazon.
You know, to be scared absolutely crapless. And obviously, once you've read it, it'll never have the same effect again. But even if you do reread it, you sometimes relive that first time. And Stephen King's got this remarkable way of telling the story, and it goes along at a relatively sedate pace, and it's signposted all the way through what is going to happen. But however he manages to do it, it's almost like he's deflecting you from the obvious. And there's a point about probably just over a third, maybe towards halfway through, when you suddenly realize what's going to happen, because he's set it up perfectly, and then something happens. And I remember I might even have been sat on a train when I read this, and it was almost that moment of, oh my God, no, please tell me that's not what's going to happen. And of course it was. And then the rest of the book is the really quite graphic description of the thing that happens, and it's really scary. And the way he writes it just sucks you in. It's got monsters in it. It's got cats in it. It's got ghosts as well, and a lot of it, as you would expect, takes place in the dark and in the woods. And honestly, it's just a perfect example of storytelling, full stop. But an amazing example of horror, raw horror. And I challenge anybody to read it. And if they've never read it before, you get to that point where you just, oh, I can't believe that this is what he's going to do. Now, of course, they've made 2 films of this book. One came out in the 80s, 85 or 86, and there was actually one a couple of years ago. And neither of those films manages to pull off the same narrative, almost deflection. So you pretty much know what's going to happen in both films almost 5 minutes in. Whereas when you read the book for the first time, Stephen King just completely takes you in, and then almost like whacks you over the head with a cricket bat or something. And that it's that moment of realization that has always put this book so high up my list of favorites.
Okay. So what do you think you like about horror then? What's the thing that makes you interested in this kind of horror book?
It's a very good question. A lot of Stephen King books particularly tend to be based upon older fiction. For example, he wrote a book called Salem's Lot, which was about vampires taking over an American town, and a lot of the imagery and a lot of the history and the folklore that he put into that book, he took from Bram Stoker, from Dracula. I guess the thing is, it's a really good horror book for me is when it's set in a recognizable place. Most of Stephen King's books are set in normal towns, the sort of places where you and I would live. And yet these incredible things happen. So I think it's just that juxtaposition of something relatively safe, like our lives, and then there's something completely left of field shocking that just sort of takes you out of your environment, and it just makes you suspend your disbelief, and it just sucks you along. And I think it's just that, I can imagine that happening, and I can't believe he's thought of that. But then the description just takes you along. So it's just the the storytelling that makes the hairs rise on the back of your neck, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move on to maybe
Yeah.
the same author. The Long Walk, Bachman books, but I only put Bachman books there because it wasn't originally written under Stephen King's name, was it? It was written under somebody, Bachman. It was his pen.
That's right. Now, The Long Walk itself was actually the first book that Stephen King ever wrote. So it was written way back in the 70s. And I think if you read the foreword to the Bachman books, as you've said, he says that he wrote it and he put it into a cupboard for about a decade and never even got it. And then a decade later, he got it out and read it again and thought, actually, that's pretty damn good. And I think it was at the time when Stephen King had become famous. So he'd written Carrie, he'd done Salem's Lot. I think there was The Stand was out. And he thought, I wonder whether my name is now selling the books rather than the quality of the stories and the quality of the narrative. So he decided to publish a few books under a pseudonym, a different name, to see whether they would become successful as well, and almost prove to himself that it was his writing that was the thing that was getting him the sales rather than the name. And he was proved right, because these Richard Bachman books became very popular as well. And I think it was a journalist that actually blew it and revealed it to the market. And then after that, they just rebranded them all under the Stephen King logo. No, so the Long Walk is a remarkable little book, because again, he wrote it, his first book, he was in his late teens, and yet the book has got so much world wisdom in it and so much maturity. You think this must have been written by somebody in his 50s who's had a lifetime of experience. It's staggering that it was written by somebody just about to become 20, and effectively it's set in the future. It doesn't name a date, and it's analogous a little bit to, I guess, to the Hunger Games, but it obviously predates the Hunger Games by about 3 decades. And a battle royale type thing. So you've got 100 boys basically start walking as part of this annual race, and they've got to walk at 4 miles an hour. And if they fall below 4 miles an hour, they get a warning. And if they get 3 warnings in a row, on the 4th warning, they are given their ticket. Now, again, Stephen King in classic style avoids telling you what the ticket is until the first person falls below 4 miles an hour for the 4th time. And then, of course, that's the other oh my God moment when this kid just gets his head blown off by the soldiers. So the idea is that these 100 boys walk until there's only one of them left, and the one who's left gets as much money and whatever he wants for the rest of his life. And the entire book takes place on this road of these 100 boys basically whittled down one by one. And again, the concept is just really scary, and the way he writes it is really scary. And yet these boys create relationships with each other. They're not allowed to touch each other because of that breaks the rules. They're not allowed to leave the road to cuddle anybody, or they've got their family on the side of the road, but they're not allowed to touch them. They're not allowed to stop for a bite to eat or to go to the toilet. They're just going to carry on. And again, it's just one of those books. It's not long. It's a couple of 100 pages, if that, and yet you can be sucked along, just like Pet Sematary. The storytelling is remarkable, and that basic concept is really quite scary. And as I say, it's inspired other books like Hunger Games, Battle Royale, which was a Japanese film, but also, I guess, games like Fortnite, which are battle royale type games where you start with 100 players and you get whittled down to one survivor at the end. So, the two things are storytelling, but the fact that he wrote it when he was in his late teens, and yet it demonstrates that world wisdom of somebody in the 50s. I just still can't get my head around that. It's absolutely remarkable.
Yeah, I think he's always been an old person, hasn't he?
an old person, in young person's clothing, but now he's an old person as well. So
now he can now officially identify as an old person. Okay, let's go on to the next one. which is Goldfinger by Ian Fleming. Might be the well-known film made about this.
Yeah, now, obviously, I'm a massive fan of the Bond movies, and admittedly, I watched the Bond films first before I read the books. During the lockdown, the first lockdown, I think my wife and I watched a Bond film pretty much every night for 24 nights. We just went through them all one by one. It was that sort of time, wasn't it, when you were doing things like that? Now, some of the original books were obviously written in the 1950s. So you've obviously got that difference in the time scale and everything. It was post-war, a lot different to where we are now, even a lot different to the world that was portrayed in the movies, even though the movies only started probably 10 years later. But Goldfinger, to me, is probably the best of the Ian Fleming original Bond books. And again, I think that it's the storytelling that I find remarkable about Goldfinger itself. He splits the book into 3 bits. There's the first section is called Happenstance. The second section is called Coincidence, and the third section is called Enemy Action. And basically, it's the 3 meetings that he has with Goldfinger. The first one is purely by chance. The second one, he orchestrates it, but tries to make it a coincidence. And then the third is when they try to rob the Fort Knox dispensary in America. And again, the locations across the world, the storytelling, the pacing, the description. And I guess, having seen the film before I read the book, you cannot help but read the book and see Gert Frobe saying the words of Goldfinger in the film, in the book. And, Odd Job is described in the book as a guy with a bowler hat. So I see the guy from the film. It would be really interesting to have read the book first, not having seen the film, to see whether the imagery would have been different. But one of the things that I do find quite remarkable about the way the book then became the film, Tim, was that obviously Goldfinger's plot was to steal the gold out of Fort Knox in America. And the idea is that they're going to poison the soldiers, and they're going to go in and they're going to take all this gold bullion away, which is absolutely ridiculous because there are millions and millions and millions of gold bars in Fort Knox, and you would need millions of trucks, and it would take them months and months to fill the trucks up. So you read the book and you think, yeah, well, this is never going to happen, is it? And then what they did in the film is they actually almost like fixed it. And Sean Connery actually says to Goldfinger, you couldn't do this because you'd need 100,000 trucks and it would take you months and blah, blah, blah. And that's when Goldfinger in the film says, well, actually, we're just going to explode a dirty nuclear bomb in the fort so that the gold becomes radioactive. So I always thought that was really clever. The book was probably trying to be a little bit too ambitious with its scope, and they had to then go and fix it with the film, which sometimes it's the opposite way around, isn't it? The book's more detailed than the film ends up being.
Yeah, but it sounds like you still found the book entertaining and the most. Have you read most of the Bond books, or is this one specifically?
No, I have read most of them. There are a couple of the more obscure ones. I've not read The Spy Who Loved Me, and I think Octopussy and the Living Daylights was a collection of short stories. But all the other ones I've read, Goldfinger to me is probably the one that's closest to the way the film turned out. Some of the others, it may even just be the name of the book, and the name of the film is the same, and that's pretty much where it ends. But Goldfinger is pretty, almost even some of the dialogue from the book is almost word for word into the film, which sometimes, it doesn't happen, does it? The script writers tend to rewrite quite a lot of it. But I remember thinking, no, Sean Connery did say that. Gert Frobe did say that.
So this was the best of the Bond books for you.
I reckon it was the best of the Bond books for me, definitely. Although I do like some of the others. From Russia with Love is good as well.
Okay, and we're gonna go into different genre completely.
Different genre.
Woo-hoo-hoo-hoo. The Pursuit of Wow by Tom Peters.
This is probably one of the first business books that I read.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking back to when I started working in big corporates. So we're talking about early 1990s, just before I moved up to Edinburgh. And as you know, I have a sort of love-hate relationship with big corporates. They tend to overcomplicate things. They tend to find safety in mediocrity. It's so much easier to be as good as everybody else, but a lot of companies just can't be bothered with either the expense or the effort of trying to differentiate themselves. And therefore, you end up everybody sort of collecting together in a sort of similar space. I mean, I even think you see it with airlines now.
Yeah.
You know, 20 odd years ago when EasyJet came along, and Stelios launched EasyJet, it was genuinely different. It stood out because it was low cost. You had to phone up to book.
Mm.
The cabin crew wore tracksuits, etc. Whereas now the low cost model is pretty much exactly the same. So to me, the only real difference between Ryanair and Wizz and EasyJet is the color of the tailplane. The model and the experience is pretty similar. And that's the same with a lot of these corporates. And I remember reading The Pursuit of Wow by Tom Peters at the time. And it was almost that sort of revelationary moment again, in the same way as I guess Pet Sematary was that, oh my God, I can't believe he's going to do this in fiction. This was this is just so obvious. But why does big corporate not do it? Now, as you would expect by the title, all Tom Peters is saying is, if you want to be successful in business, you've got to stand out somehow. You've got to find some USP, some unique selling feature, whether it's a product, whether it's a service, whether it's your customer service, whether it's your process. But unless you do something different and make people say, wow, by doing that different thing, then you are going to be collected together in mediocrity with everybody else. And that almost became, right, this is what I really want to do. And I was very fortunate not long after that to become involved in a startup business within UK financial services. And we had a go at doing the wow factor. I can't say we totally succeeded, but we managed to do things differently. And ironically, about 10 years down the line, we then got subsumed within a bigger organization. And guess what? It all went back to being all the same again, which is one of the things that happens when successful small companies become so successful they get bought by bigger companies, and those bigger companies tend to kill off whatever it was that made those smaller companies successful. But Pursuit of Wow was definitely there was another book as well by Tom Peters which came out shortly afterwards. I should have looked it up. It's something like Brand You. Is it Brand You?
Brand New.
And he was going on about how you as a person can become a brand. Now, of course, these days, because of people like Chris Ducker and all that, personal branding is much more of a accepted concept. But when I remember reading the sequel to Pursuit of, it might not have been the sequel, but it was around about the same time, Brand You, or I'll have to look it up now. But it was basically describing building a personal brand for yourself without calling it a personal brand because somebody hadn't coined that phrase yet. So I did reread Pursuit of Wow probably about 3 years ago, and obviously it was just as the internet was getting started, so we didn't have as much tech as we have now. But the actual basic concepts, absolutely the same, just that back then as they are now. Finding the difference and focusing on the difference and making people say, wow, that is different. And that can be a route to success.
Well, going to his website, as I was Googling in the background, the Brand New 50 ways to transform yourself an employee into a brand. So I don't know if the 50s because it was 50 years ago. Or
could be it. That could be it.
But this is looking on Tom Peters' website. So it's called, the Project 50. Oh, okay, maybe he's got some other. Anyway, we can all Google it. So the book I remember reading In Search of Excellence, which I think was one of his books.
Yes, that was around the same time as well. I think that might have been a bit earlier.
I was really impressed, but I can't remember anything about it. There's lots of business books that I remember being impressed by, and then I'm like, I can't remember what they said. So yeah, this is definitely one that I think is surprisingly, it's the first Tom Peters book we've had on this show. There's a lot of books that keep coming up again and again, including the next book
I think maybe with this whole business thing, I'm a bit like you. I've read loads of business books and quite a lot of I couldn't quote actual words to you, but it's probably that feeling that it was just a really good time for me to read something like that when I was feeling stifled by a big corporate company. And I read it and thought, "Do you know what? This guy's right. Something needs to change." And maybe that's what you need out of a business book rather than the ABC. You just get that prompt or that feeling or that kick up the backside or something.
Yeah, well, I think the big problem because I've worked in corporate years ago, and I think what you need to succeed as an entrepreneur in a smaller business, what actually you need to succeed in the market is to be different, as you say. But when you're in a corporation, because you're in a hierarchy, what you need to succeed is to do what everybody expects you to do.
Yes.
Which is not necessarily the different thing. So
No.
I think it is that struggle, and that's basically what kills off most big companies eventually, in that they end up just doing the expected thing.
Yeah, absolutely right.
Or they end up in a room with kind of a big whiteboard and everybody, let's brainstorm. And it's like, they're not going to and then all these silly ideas, which are the ones that might make money, are the ones that are crossed off straight away. Anyway,
we can't do that. We can't do that.
I'll stop lining big corporate and go on to the next one. Which is They Ask, You Answer by Marcus Sheridan. And this has been on the show a few times before.
Well, I've actually managed to grab hold of a copy of this one, so it's a hardback as well. Now then, when I was working for that smaller company, was sort of talking about 2008, 2008, 09. I started listening to podcasts, started listening to and watching about content marketing. That's when I started getting into content creation. When I was in big corporate, working with that smaller upstart, we did actually create our own website of blogs. We didn't even know it was a blog until somebody told us that it was a blog. And so I actually started doing content marketing quite early, even though I didn't really know that that's what it was pegged as. But one of the earliest podcasts I came across was this thing called The Sales Lion, which was Marcus Sheridan. Now, at the time, Marcus Sheridan was running a swimming pool company, and if this book's been on the show before, somebody else will have told this story. But as you know, what happened was in the crash of 2008, his swimming pool business nearly went out of business, and effectively he saved that business by doing videos of his swimming pools and answering the many questions that people had about swimming pools, like, how deep are they? What's the water temperature? What chemicals do any question you can think of about swimming pools. He did a video to answer that question, and effectively it turned the business round. They weathered the recession and came back. And he then effectively pivoted and started this other business called The Sales Line originally, and it's now called Impact, I think, which was more of a content marketing company. And he started teaching this whole mantra of really good marketing is actually just about answering the questions that your customers have about your service and about your product. And if you answer those questions either as videos or as podcasts or as articles or whatever it might be, the very fact that you're answering those questions in an engaging way is less intrusive than advertising and is likely ultimately to make people want to buy from you more. And the book, They Ask You Answer, is effectively a distillation of quite a lot of those early podcasts. And of course, now he's been traveling the world teaching this whole idea. His book really just brings all of those ideas together. Now, for me, it's an absolute perfect blueprint for how content marketing works.
Yeah.
I'm still old school enough to think, with marketing, you still need to have the strategic elements. They ask you answer is a bit more like, once you've got your product and your service, this is how you market it. So I still think there's a bit to be done. But as a blueprint for doing something engaging rather than being intrusive or annoying, I just don't think you can get better than Marcus's teachings. The stuff that he does is very rarely, if ever, I've never seen him do anything that's annoying. He never does anything that's intrusive. All his videos were highly engaging, highly informative, and it's a very good mantra to have. And quite a lot of people could learn a lot from either reading that book or watching some of his stuff, because we are still surrounded by so much intrusive crap, aren't we? It doesn't answer questions. In fact, it makes you think of more questions, probably. It interrupts you, it gets on your nerves, and it's not engaging. So I think as a blueprint, that's definitely a must read for a lot of people.
Yeah, I remember, I think it was some conference site or something I was looking at recently, and it didn't have where the event was, when the event was, or how much it cost on the main website. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to click this link and now be forever retargeted or abused by this thing just to click through it and find, oh, it's somewhere at a time I can't do in a place I'm not going to go to. So, yeah, I agree that this book is, I mean, I've read this book. I need to reread it again, actually, but it is basically, for lots and lots of businesses, basically the blueprint to doing content marketing.
Yeah, and one of the things that is also I like about it, Tim, is that he actually gets you to answer questions that you're probably a bit nervous about asking, like how much is our service? How much does it cost? Who are our competitors? How many business? I'm not talking about our competitors as Aviva or Royal London or whatever it is, or whatever industry you're in. We don't want to talk about our competitors, but Marcus Sheridan says your customers are going to have questions about your competitors. If you answer the questions about your competitors, then you're likely to have an advantage over them immediately, because they won't have done the same thing about you. And yet, oh no, we can't possibly. Oh, we're not telling people how much it is until we're further down the line. And again, he said, no. If people are going to ask how much it costs, it should be there on the website. It should be in a video, or it should be in an article, or it should be somehow projected. And yeah, as you say, a blueprint.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as you say, with competitors, I mean, if you say, maybe you should go with our competitor X, because if you're this sort of customer,
yeah,
and that builds up so much trust when you say that. But if you're this kind of customer, you want to go with us, that to a customer means, oh yeah, this is an honest company that actually wants us to. They know the sort of customers they want. But too many people are just trying to get everybody, and it's like they never mention. They might, if they mention the competitor, it's just to say, well, company X is terrible or whatever, and that's, well, that may or may not be true, but that's not much. That doesn't make you seem like a good company, does it? Yeah.
No, I think that's a fabulous point you've just made there, because what it also demonstrates is that you've taken the time to identify your ideal customer and what their needs are, what their wants are, so you can recognize them as your ideal customer. And as you say, if somebody comes along and doesn't fit that brief, then it's okay to say, you're not our customer. Our product isn't actually for you.
Yeah.
Therefore, if you bought it, you probably wouldn't be happy with it. So we'll be honest with you now and point you down the road to another company, and everybody's happy then, because we don't get a customer that ultimately we end up either falling out with or disappointing, and they get the product that they actually wanted rather than one that they find out later wasn't suitable.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's go on to the next book. Storyworthy by Matthew Dix.
Yeah, so this sort of maybe weaves everything together from so far, because this isn't really a business book, and it's not fiction either. Now, as you've probably realized, storytelling has been part of my existence. I loved stories when I was kid. I love being told stories. When I got older, I loved to start telling stories. As a business person, I've enjoyed telling stories on stages and on podcasts and things like this. And I started watching, again, I think this was probably during the lockdown. Sorry, I started listening to, I came across this podcast called The Moth. And The Moth is an event that takes place predominantly in the States, but there are some events take place in Britain and Europe. And basically it's a live show in a venue, and 10 people will get up, and they often get selected at random, and they have to tell a story. And they have to tell a story that has actually happened to them. It's not got to be fiction. It actually has to be a personal story. And obviously that story can be, it can be something that happened to them as a child that
Yeah.
shaped their future, like a little boy reading a book called The Menace of Mask, perhaps. Or it could be, relationship with mother and father, first love, first job, something that happened, climbing a mountain, being involved in a car crash, whatever it might be. And they tell the story to this audience. And now it's not comedy either, although a lot of the stories are very funny. And they tend to last between 7 and 10 minutes. So it's quite a short time span that they've got. And at the end of the night, they vote on the best of the 10 people, and that person gets a pat on the back and a certificate or something. And then if they win one of these, they can get moved into a region, and then they have a national final. And it's a big institution. And this guy, Matthew Dix, has won this Moth competition at local level, international level, all around the United States, etc. And he's renowned as one of the best storytellers. And I listen to a lot of his stories, and yeah, wow, his technique is great. He sucks you in. He's got that element of the Stephen King ability to suspend your disbelief. He can describe things, but the pacing's always very good as well. And he always has something that you'll remember after those 10 minutes have gone by. And Storyworthy is his book about how to tell a story.
Okay.
And what he's doing is he's saying, I'm going to teach you how to tell a story about something that's happened to you personally. So the start of the book, as you can imagine, is, well, where are those stories? And that's a question of going back through your life. Did you keep a diary? It might be in your diary. Start a diary now if you haven't already started one, and note something down. And the day your child walks for the first time, or the day you get married, what's happening. And then he takes you through all the steps that he would go through to actually put a story together. So you have things like pacing and description, how to do dialogue. Is it first person? Is it all in chronological order? Are there flashbacks? It's really quite interesting. And by the end of the book, you could put together a story which would potentially work on the Moth stage. But when I read this, having been a fan of storytelling for so long, I did realize that even though I think the foreword to this book says, this book will tell you how to tell a personal story so that you could potentially get up at the Moth and speak to the Moth. I think that you read this book and you do business storytelling, either on stages or on podcasts like this or whatever, you could still learn one hell of a lot about storytelling by reading this book, because the basic techniques and some of the ideas that he has to get you to think slightly differently about how you would talk about something that's happened, I think you could easily come away a better business storyteller as well as a personal storyteller. Because let's face it, a lot of us aren't going to go along to one of these Moth nights and start talking about our first love or whatever it might be. But some of us might need to get up on a stage and talk about ChatGTP or something like that, and here are the storytelling techniques. So I love this book because obviously he's won so many of these Moths, that he's got so many stories to tell, and he obviously includes quite a few of those stories in the book itself. And what's also quite nice is if you don't want to actually read the story, there's usually a URL to the YouTube video as well that you can actually watch him telling that story actually on the stage.
Yeah. Well, I mean, quite a few times I've heard you tell your John the wine man stories. So I know that you've learned the lessons of storytelling from this book. Anyway, if anybody wants to see that story, I've got a clip of it on the other show that I do. We won't talk about it at the moment. We'll go on to the final book, which is by a very auspicious author. Cats, Mats, and Marketing Plans by Roger Edwards.
Yeah, this is my book. This is the one what I wrote. There we go.
So, Cats, Mats, and Marketing Plans.
Yeah, again, the idea there was to stand out a little bit, and it's not like the Dummy's Guide to Marketing or how to do marketing in one easy lesson or marketing 101. I also wanted a cat to be on the cover because my wife and I have always had cats, still have cats. And I tell this other story in some of my talks, which involves a cat sitting on a mat. And it's quite a powerful story about how to keep things simple. Again, maybe in a corporate environment or in marketing. So I had the title of Cats and Mats and Marketing Plans in my head for quite a while, but really the book was almost like those 20 years that I spent in big corporate, almost like fighting against complexity, trying to do things simpler, trying to stand out. And the stories that I recorded along the way, including appearing on a Watchdog TV series to defend a financial services company that I was working for at the time, that narrative eventually found its way into this book. So it's basically a book about how to write a very simple marketing plan without complexity, and probably with a wow factor in there that was subliminally planted in my mind by Tom Peters all those years ago. But I've told stories throughout that of examples that I've had from my own corporate life or from the startup or from doing talks and this, that, and the other. And effectively the culmination is that idea of the cat sitting on the mat, and then and the complexity angle. And I wrote it. I included this actually in the introduction. The day I decided I was absolutely going to do it was when I was flying to Montenegro, and I'd been invited to do a speech in Montenegro, and the speech included the cat on the mat section.
Yeah.
And I had this moment when honestly, it was so nice, Tim, and as an aviation enthusiast and a traveler, you'll know what this is like. I was sat on this plane in a window seat, and I was lucky enough to have the two seats next to me free, which is always nice. And I had a glass of beer or glass of wine, I can't remember, and we were flying over Croatia, which was just as we start the descent into Montenegro. And honestly, the view out the window was phenomenal, and I had this sort of instant attack of imposter syndrome, which was this sort of, what the hell do you think you're doing? Sitting on this plane, going to a country where English isn't their first language, and you're going to stand up and give this talk, which might have worked with an English-speaking audience, but you can't honestly believe that you're going to pull it off in a country where they don't speak English as their first language. And honestly, it was like that blood drains from the face moment. And I actually sort of get the cabin crew back, bring the trolley back out, give me another drink. As it turned out, you know, the people were there at the airport. They picked me up. They were so nice. The conference went down really well. The speech really went down well, and I hadn't need to worry because most of the people in the audience spoke better English than I do. And even those who didn't, they had these translating headphone things that they could wear anyway. So I just came away absolutely bouncing, absolutely elated. And it was on the way home, I thought, that story is going to be the introduction of the book, because it leads into the whole cat thing. And I went away and wrote it in the lead up to the pandemic. It was originally going to come out at the beginning of 2020. And I thought, when we were locked down, I thought, no, I'll hang on to it. Probably in hindsight, I should have hung on to it a bit longer, because I eventually launched it in November 2020. And then they locked us down again, didn't they? So I probably should have hung on until the summer of 2021, but hindsight is a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
And I never wrote the book expecting to sell millions, and I definitely haven't sold millions. I've sold enough. I'm happy with the number I've sold, but it's almost like having that sort of, book-shaped calling card or book-shaped business card. And if anybody books me to speak and they haven't got a massive budget, I ask them if they'll buy a case full of the books, and sometimes they do.
Well, also, like, if somebody wants to understand everything that you talk about,
Yeah,
you can now send them to the book. You've got that as a
yeah,
source of, like, if you can't afford to see me speak, or you can't go to Croatia and Montenegro or whatever, you can just buy the book.
yeah,
So
yeah.
even on that basis, it's good. So who would you say would make you most happy to read your book? Who would be the ideal person? What kind of, this almost sounds like a bloody marketing persona, but like,
Yeah.
what kind of story, somebody who read your book, who would you think will get the most out of your book?
The people that I think the book works best for are probably people who don't have a marketing background. So
Yeah,
they haven't done a marketing degree like I have. They haven't been on a marketing course, but they find themselves having to do marketing for wherever it is they work. So they may be a salesperson who is asked to do some marketing, or a customer service person who is,
yeah,
will you do some marketing a couple of days a week? We can't afford a full-time marketing person. Or you could work for a company that everybody just has to pitch in. So I actually say that in the introduction of the book. If you've got a marketing degree, or you've taken a post-grad in, the CII or something, not the CII, the CMI, if you've got a chartered thing like that, then you're probably not going to learn anything about marketing from this book. Although what I would hope is that maybe I could point out a few things where you may be doing things a little bit too complicated, and
yeah,
you might get a little bit out of it from that. But if you haven't got a marketing background, but you are doing marketing either inadvertently or unconsciously, then I think that this book will help you. Because if you find yourself in that position and you go out there, it can be quite intimidating to
mm,
sign up to do a marketing course, or let's face it, you could buy one for $97 and it will probably be rubbish. Or
yeah,
you could read any number of quite brilliant but quite complicated marketing books that maybe are at graduate level, whereas I try to pitch this at a much simpler level. So I do talk about strategy, but I try to keep it simple, and I do talk about positioning, and I do talk about research and goals and the 4 Ps of marketing, but I try to keep it conversational rather than academic. So definitely aimed at people who find themselves doing marketing without having had a marketing background.
okay. So I think it's probably time to talk about Roger Edwards.
Yes,
Even though we have talked about Roger Edwards in
a little
business
bit.
quite a lot anyway. So how can people, like, let's say they read your book and then they think, well, I'm running this business conference and I want to hire Roger as a speaker. Or maybe they've read your book and they're like, well, I've got questions. I actually want to work. Can they work with you more? Can they click a button somewhere on your website and work with you more in some other way? I mean, what do you do apart from your writing, and
Yeah.
how can people interact with you in a business way?
At the moment, I am a marketing consultant and a speaker.
Yeah,
So the principles of marketing that I talk about in the book, keeping things simple. The 3 things of a marketing strategy in the book are coming up with your offer, setting your goals, and planning your activity. Now,
yeah,
the activity bit is what people probably usually feel is marketing. That's the advertising, the content,
yeah,
that sort of thing. It's the offer and the goals that a lot of people don't end up doing, and that's the strategy bit. That's where you academically, that's where you're talking about
yeah.
research and positioning and segmentation and all of that sort of thing. So as a consultant, I can practice what I preach and help companies small businesses, whoever it might be, to put together a simple marketing plan, oblique strategy, based upon the way that I wrote the book. Now, annoyingly, I came up with a better articulation of this whole thing after the book had been published. I suddenly had another of those epiphany moments during probably the third lockdown, where I just had this idea of the circle of marketing simplicity, which includes that offer and goal and activity, but it also has a simplicity banner on it as well. So there will probably be a second edition of the book eventually, when I get round to doing it, to
Yeah.
effectively just reframe it, because I think that works a little bit better. But if you need somebody to help you put together a plan, nice and simple, without all of that academic complexity, then that's the sort of thing that I would help people with. But as you've already said, I'm more than happy to either do workshops or stand on stages and do speeches. Yes, I've done the cat on the mat speech lots of times. John the Wine Man, people actually ask for the John the Wine Man speech now, which is so good. It's
Yeah.
probably about 4 or 5 years old now, so it's probably about time to start putting that one to bed. But yeah, people still do ask for it, and of course, I'd be more than happy to do something bespoke. We've learnt so much over the last few years when we've been in lockdown,
Yeah.
and of course, we've seen, we've had hysteria about NFTs. We've had hysteria about the metaverse. NFTs and metaverse have disappeared now. Everybody's going absolutely batshit about Chat GTP. That's the
AI. Yeah.
latest flashy toy, isn't it? You can buy a course for Chat GTP for $97 now. Can I just say that, for whatever, this is one of the most embarrassing things about being a marketing person. Somebody once in the past thought it was a good idea to put the number 7 at the end of everything,
Yeah.
on the understanding that there's some sort of universe Jedi mind trick going on, that if you put a 7 at the end of a number, it automatically makes people buy it. Please, if you're watching this and you're a marketing person, it's bullshit. It doesn't have that effect. In fact, if you put a 7 at the end of your price, it just makes everybody realize that you're one of those people that
Yeah.
bought the bullshit. So change it to a 9 or a 2 or something. But if it's a 7, for goodness sake.
Well, I mean, I think the 99.99 thing works better than 100. I can see the psychology of that, but I've never understood the 97 thing. As you say, that seems to be, that's almost like a marker that you've done a marketing course.
I
More
think
than
you
anything else.
can actually trace it back. I did actually have a look, and there was an article about 20 odd years ago where somebody was just offering an opinion. Did different numbers have different effects?
Yeah.
And I think it was almost a tongue-in-cheek thing. Try slapping a 7 on the end of it.
Yeah.
And then it's one of those things that then just grew legs, and everybody now believes that it's like in Edinburgh, every single tourist thinks that if they rub Bobby's nose, Greyfriars Bobby's statues, they rub the nose, it'll bring them good luck. So poor old Bobby's statue's now got a bright bronze nose because everybody rubs the paint off. But it was actually a rumor started by a travel company about 20 years ago. Before that, Bobby's nose was the same color as the rest of his body, and now that travel company has created something which, it's like, and the other one is Blue Monday, isn't it? At the beginning of the
Yeah.
year, Blue Monday was originally an ad campaign for Sky Travel back in the early 2000s, and now everybody thinks Blue Monday is actually a real day of the year, and the 7 is something like that. Sorry,
Yeah.
we've gone off on a bit of a tangent there.
No, well, it comes back to the whole corporate thing, doesn't it? It's like everybody follows in. People tend to want to follow or group or clump together, but the problem is that's probably, well, I mean, you can either be the person following in, but you really want to be the person at the front who's leading the trend. I think
Yeah.
it's come back to the Tom Peters thing.
I think the bottom line is, Tim, it's hard to be different.
Yeah.
It's hard to be simple as well. If you allow things to stay complicated and you allow things to be very similar to everybody else, it makes your life a hell of a lot easier. But it doesn't mean that you're going to be successful. It just means you're going to be part of the pack.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the problem is that if you're different and it doesn't work, then it's really, you're opening yourself up to criticism, and then that feeling of like you didn't press 1 when everybody else was pressing 1, you pressed 2 on the
Yeah.
keyboard, and
Yeah.
it's like the fact that if you pressed 3, you would have made 10 times as much money, but you pressed 2. That's what. So nobody wants to be that person, but it's the fact that you could have pressed the right button, you could have made the thing, is where success comes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's an element of thick-skinnedness, and I think complexity again is a way of covering that up. It's like, well, we're going to try and press a different button, but we won't say we're pressing another button. We'll say that we're facilitating an AI program that goes to the metaverse and uses an appendage to press something on I'm trying to think of what another word for keyboard is. Go for the thesaurus. So rather than pressing another button, we're going to be utilizing AI in the metaverse to do something. So that's the way it would work. But yeah, as you say, complexity has its issues, doesn't it? Really, that's a big problem.
Yeah, and being simple takes a lot of effort, and unfortunately, a lot of the time it's just easier to stay complicated.
Yeah. Anyway, it's been great to talk to you this evening. I'll try and put these clips onto Amazon. I should be able to do that. So hopefully some of them will be accepted and put onto the product pages. It's a shame that for whatever reason, probably Virgin Media related, I mean to slander them, I can go live seeing it. But it's been great to talk to you anyway. And
Yeah, as always, Tim.
YouTube.
As always. As always.
So thanks so much for coming on the show. And I've
No
got
problem at all.
I've got no end graphics. I'm just going to press the end broadcast button. So here we go.